Good morning, everybody. Today, for our social studies, we are going to be reading The History of Fun Stuff, The Scoop on Ice Cream. And this is all about the history of ice cream. This was written by Bonnie Williams and illustrated. There's a little glare on there. All right, let's begin. The Scoop on Ice Cream. And there are 4 chapters. Chapter 1, The Origins of Ice Cream. You know lots of things about ice cream, right? You know it's delicious and you know your favorite flavor. You also know that ice cream comes in cups or cones and that you eat it with a spoon or just lick it right off the scoop. But what do you know about the history of ice cream? Do you know who invented it and when? Or which United States presidents loved ice cream? We know some of that from last week. Today, if you have a hankering for ice cream, it is easy enough to find some. You just buy it from the supermarket or go to your favorite ice cream parlor and order a scoop or 2. But did you know it wasn't always so easy to satisfy your craving? And do you know where those scoops come from or how they were made? That's where this book comes in. By the time you finish reading this book, you will know the answers to these questions and many more. You will be a history of fun stuff expert on ice cream. The history of ice cream is not an easy one to piece together. Sometimes it seems about as clear as a bowl of ice cream soup and just as messy. What historians do know for sure is that frozen treats have been enjoyed for at least 2,000 years. In ancient times, snow and ice were combined with flavors like honey, fruit, and juice. Nero, a Roman emperor who ruled ancient Italy from the year 54 to the year 68, would make his slaves run up high into the mountains for ice. When the slaves returned, they added fruit and juice to the ice to make something we'd recognize today as a slushie or Italian ice. And I think it's important to clarify, too, that in this book they're using the word slaves, but I prefer to use the term enslaved people because it reminds us that the people who were enslaved were people. And so Nero had his enslaved people run up to get ice. Oh, wow, the book is really doing some crazy stuff with the green screen. There it is. Now you can see it. That was weird. Sort of magical. The Chinese people were probably the first to mix ice and snow with milk, making a creamy dish that more closely resembles the ice cream we know and love today. There is a record of frozen dairy treats made of milk, flour, and camphor as far back as the Tang dynasty that began in the year 618 and ended in the year 907. Camphor is a substance that comes from the camphor tree. It has a very strong smell. Today, camphor is used in mothballs, gels to help with colds, and insect repellent. Just don't eat any of those. Ooh, that must have been very strong. It would almost be like eating like a pine ice cream. I know that Wild Scoops does make a spruce tip ice cream, so that would sort of be similar to this, but it's hard to imagine eating like a mothball flavored ice cream. But I'm sure it was delicious then. It must have been something that people loved if they kept making it. It took centuries for ice cream to make its way from China to Europe. There are many legends about how it did so. One of the most famous ones involves a man you may have already heard of named Marco Polo. In the 1200s, he traveled from Italy to China. Some say that he returned with recipes for ice cream, but there is no evidence to support this. Regardless, by the 1600s, ice cream was enjoyed throughout Europe, and in the later half of the century, it was being served at the royal court of England. Not long after this, ice cream arrived in the American colonies. So here's a little map showing the path of ice cream and the path of Marco Polo. Chapter 2, Almost Modern History. Ice cream has been a part of the American way of life since the very beginning, even before the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. When the states were still colonies of England, the well-to-do would serve ice cream at parties and other events. When they say the well-to-do, they mean the people in the communities who had the most money. That's what that term means. One night in 1744, the governor of the Maryland colony served ice cream after dinner. We know about this because one of his guests was so amazed by the dessert that he wrote about it in a letter. This is the oldest record of ice cream in the Americas. Our founding fathers and mothers had a real sweet tooth for ice cream too. In 1790, George Washington was a year into being the first president of the United States. That summer, he and his wife Martha spent $200 on ice cream. It's a lot of money, but it's even more when you think about how much that would be worth today. Unfortunately, it's hard to calculate the value of money from that far back, but we do know that as little as 100 years ago, $200 was worth more than $4,700 today. How much ice cream do you think you could buy with that much money? Can you imagine in one summer spending $4,700 on ice cream? That is a lot of money. Holy Toledo. Another founding father and the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, is known for having done many things. He wrote the Declaration of Independence and started his own university, the University of Virginia. But did you know that he also loved ice cream? He kept a recipe for vanilla ice cream written in his own handwriting. He discovered this recipe in France where he was an ambassador before he became the American president. When he returned to the United States, he would often serve ice cream at his parties. If you had been seated at Thomas Jefferson's table, there's a good chance you would have eaten ice cream based on this recipe. Until the mid-1800s, making ice cream was hard work that took hours to be done by hand. Then, in 1843, a woman named Nancy Johnson patented the first ice cream maker that made the work a bit easier. Here's how her machine worked. You'd start with two cans, one smaller and one larger. In the smaller can, you would add your basic ice cream ingredients like milk, sugar, and flavoring. Then you would add ice and salt to the larger can and fit the smaller can inside. Next, you'd use a crank to churn the mixture in the smaller can. This made the mixture smooth and creamy, while the ice in the larger can simultaneously froze it. After about 20 to 45 minutes of cranking, you could enjoy your ice cream. Sound like fun? If you want to make ice cream the old-fashioned way, there are companies that still sell ice cream makers based on Nancy Johnson's original design. And this design is actually pretty similar to the experiment that we had this week for science, where we take the small bag with our ice cream ingredients and put it in the large bag with our ice and our salt. So it's kind of interesting that this is something that you could create at home to make your very own ice cream. Because of Nancy Johnson's invention, more people were able to experience the joy of eating ice cream. Another turning point came a few years later in 1851 when a man named Jacob Fussell, I've never heard that last name, Jacob Fussell, opened the first ice cream factory. As you might expect, his business boomed, and he soon opened up other factories. For the first time in its long history, ice cream was being manufactured on a large scale. To this day, Jacob Fussell is known as the father of the ice cream industry. And I can see the green screen's doing some weird stuff to his clothes. If I go like that, I wonder if I can make it. Sometimes I can tilt it and then you can see it. Chapter 3, The Scoop on Scoops, Cones, Sundaes, and More. With ice cream available to everyone, the stage was now set for classic ice cream dishes to take shape. And speaking of taking shape, you might not believe it, but there was a time when the ice cream cone didn't exist. It's hard to pinpoint exactly who invented the cone. The best evidence shows that there were a number of people who independently came up with the idea of eating ice cream out of edible cones. However, cones weren't popular until the St. Louis World Fair in 1904. Where many vendors sold them. After that, there was no turning back. The ice cream cone was here to stay. And in fact, that's the story that I've always heard, was that at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, there was an ice cream vendor located right next to a waffle vendor. So there was two different stands, and the ice cream vendor said to the waffle vendor, "Oh, what if we took one of your waffles and rolled it into a cone shape, and then we could put my ice cream in it, and then people could walk around holding their treat?" So that's the story that I've always heard. And it's interesting to learn that there was probably a lot of people who simultaneously invented the cone because they all had the same need for wanting to contain their ice cream. It's interesting how that happens in history, where people across the country or across the globe will all invent something at the same time. That's happened on more than one occasion. What about ice cream sundaes? Like the invention of the ice cream cone, the origin of the ice cream sundae is up for debate. Some believe that it was invented in 1881 in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, when chocolate sauce was drizzled on top of scoops of ice cream. Others say it was in 1892 in Ithaca, New York, when cherry syrup and cherry were added to a dish of ice cream. In both stories, the dish was named after the day, Sunday, on which it was either invented or often served. Today, there's a friendly rivalry between Ithaca and Two Rivers about the true birthplace of the sundae. And we learned a little bit about that in the video we watched last week as well. Last but not least, what about ice cream novelties? No frozen section of a grocery store would be complete without ice cream sandwiches, pops, and bars. How and when did they come about? The first ice cream novelty was a vanilla ice cream covered in a chocolate shell known as an Eskimo pie. And that term is sort of a tricky one because that term might be hurtful to people who are from the Eskimo nation in our country. And so it's interesting to think about, we have a lot more awareness now of the way that names can be hurtful to people. And long ago, so this was in 1920, there were often terms like that were used that today we would not use, because that might not make someone feel very good about having a treat named after their culture. So that's a tricky name for a treat. It was invented in 1920 by a high school teacher in Iowa who also sold ice cream. He got inspired by an 8-year-old customer who couldn't decide between buying a chocolate bar or ice cream. Since both are delicious, the teacher came up with a way of combining them. Chapter 4, Ice Cream Today. As you know, you can find ice cream everywhere these days. It is so much a part of our culture that when immigrants arrived on Ellis Island in the early 1900s, they were served ice cream. Today, almost 10% of milk production in the United States goes into the manufacturing of ice cream in every flavor and type imaginable. The ice cream industry makes a profit of $10 billion every year. $10 billion. How does the ice cream industry make so much money? It's because Americans love ice cream. The average American eats about 80 cups of ice cream every year. Depending on the size of your scoop, that's 2 to 4 scoops every 4.5 days. Ice cream has been so popular that in 1984, Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States, named July as National Ice Cream Month. Every year, the official National Ice Cream Day is the 3rd Sunday of July. Do you know what the most popular flavor of ice cream is in the United States? The answer probably won't surprise you. It's vanilla, followed by chocolate. Combined, they make up about 50% of ice cream sales. Which of those two flavors do you prefer? Do you have another favorite flavor? Do you know which flavor is your best friend's favorite? I think if I'm choosing between chocolate and vanilla, I'm going to go vanilla. And if there's an option for sprinkles, I'm going sprinkles. And it's funny because in almost every other arena of sweets, I would go for the chocolate option, but I do really like vanilla ice cream. Although my favorite kind of ice cream is ice cream with chunks in it, like chocolate chip cookie dough or mint chocolate chip or cookies and cream, or I really like Reese's ice cream. But if I'm choosing between chocolate and vanilla, I'm going vanilla. As you can probably imagine, ice cream isn't just popular in the United States. People in other countries love ice cream too. But what are some favorite flavors around the world? In Japan, there's an ice cream flavor made with squid ink. And you can find ice cream topped with caviar, also known as fish eggs, in France. But not to be outdone, the United States also makes its share of unique flavors. You can find pizza-flavored ice cream, bacon-flavored ice cream, and even garlic-flavored ice cream. Would you eat any of those flavors? Can you think of other flavors you've never heard of but would be willing to try? Congratulations! You've come to the end of this book. You are now an official History of Fun Stuff expert on ice cream. Go ahead and impress your friends and family with all the cool things you know about the world's coolest treat. And the next time you take a lick off your scoop of ice cream, think about the years of history that went into it and enjoy. Hey, kids! Now that you're an expert on the history of ice cream, turn the page to learn even more about it and some geography and science along the way. And I will include these next pages, because they're very hard to see with the green screen. I will include these next pages on Seesaw so you can see them very clearly, as well as some questions that go with it. This talks about the science of making ice cream. Let's read that. Today, ice cream is usually made with the big industrial machines used in factories or the simple countertop ice cream makers used at home. But as you learned, Nancy Johnson started it all in 1843 when she invented a hand-cranked machine that could churn out ice cream faster than ever before. Johnson's hand-cranked ice cream maker used a simple endothermic reaction to freeze ice cream. But what is an endothermic reaction? A reaction happens when one thing becomes another. For example, when you leave a can of soda open for too long, it will lose its fizz. This happens because the carbon dioxide, which is the fizzy bubbles, in the soda change from a liquid to a gas, rising to the top of the soda and then escaping into the air. The word endothermic, is used to describe any process that requires heat. Using heat to melt ice cubes into water is an endothermic process. So, an endothermic reaction is a reaction that requires heat to turn one thing into another. Baking a cake is a great example of an endothermic reaction. A set of ingredients like flour, sugar, and eggs, plus heat from the oven, react to create a cake. Now that we know what an endothermic reaction is, let's take a look at a hand-cranked ice cream maker. These ice cream makers have three parts: an outer bucket, an inner container, and a mixing tool. To make ice cream, you pour the ingredients into the inner container, which is then sealed shut with a mixing tool inside. Next, you fill the outer bucket with ice and salt, fitting the inner container in the middle of the ice-salt mixture. When salt mixes with ice, it causes an endothermic reaction. Endothermic. The reaction sucks up all of the heat from its surroundings, freezing the ice cream inside the inner container. The salt also lowers the freezing point of the ice, allowing the ice-salt mixture to get as cold as negative 21 degrees Celsius. That is really cold. While the endothermic reaction takes place, the mixing tool stirs the ice cream inside. As the ice cream is stirred, the liquid ingredients freeze into a creamy solid. Who knew science could be so delicious? Fun fact, do you know why we pour salt on snowy sidewalks? As we've just seen in our ice cream maker, salt lowers the freezing point of water. This means that salt both melts the snow on walkways and makes it harder for the water to refreeze unless it gets very, very cold. Presto! No more slippery sidewalks in winter. And I will include this quiz on Seesaw so you can respond based on what you heard. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something about ice cream. I know that I did. And I will see you later. Have a wonderful rest of your day.